I Will Make You Proud by Wheredoesshego. Trigger warning. This fic includes talk of abuse, talk of suicide, and potential sexual content. Please read with care. Chapter 7. You Will Know What Pain Is. Draco, August 1991. It was finally happening. The time Draco had spent his whole life waiting for was here. There was just 2 weeks to go until he left for Hogwarts. So why wasn't he excited? Draco found it hard to feel much of anything anymore. He felt like sometime over the past year that he had stopped being a real boy. He felt that he was like the rocking horse he had when he was small. A wooden facade of something real. Eyes unblinking, standing stock still. Easy to damage, but with no reaction when you did. He thought back to when he had carved scratches into the horse with a knife. His initials. It hadn't reacted. It still kept the same shit-eating expression that it had always had. Wooden. False. That's what he was now, Draco thought. You could do anything to him, say anything, and his reactions weren't real. When people spoke to him, Draco had physically remind himself to arrange his expression into what he thought it should be, what people should expect of him. A smile, a grimace. What was it you wanted? Whenever his parents took him out of the manor, a social gathering with other pureblood families, or to Hogsmeade, he watched other people, fascinated. So that's what joy was supposed to look like, or fear, or worry, or humor. He tried to mirror his friend's expression, Blaise's easy grin, Theo's sarcastic eyebrow raise, Pansy's arrogant smile. He copied them and then practiced them in the mirror, the same way he practiced his father's self-important air. He wanted to make sure that everyone thought he was a real boy. He didn't really know what the true Draco Malfoy looked like now, who he was. He had been alone for so much of his life, ignored unless he was being hurt or trotted out as the perfect little Malfoy heir. He felt he had learned his part perfectly. His facade was immaculately placed, just like the way his mother styled his hair. He was a living doll. Draco had spent the last year preparing, always preparing. He thought he had read every book in the Malfoy Manor. He had discovered that what he did when his father tortured him was called occluding, and he did it well. His next aim was to learn how to perform legilimens, but he needed help with that. It was tricky. Hopefully he could learn it at Hogwarts. Draco wasn't allowed a wand due to being underage, and he'd never asked to try one, but he was becoming adept at wandless magic. He hid his skill from his parents, but he was able to do some small things like opening and closing doors or moving things by himself. He even levitated one of the house elves last week. He thought maybe a real boy would have found it that funny. He had read Hogwarts, a history, from cover to cover several times. He wanted to be prepared before he went, just like his father, always prepared. And anyway, he liked being in the library. It was peaceful. He didn't go outside much anymore. It was too tricky. Draco struggled sometimes now with moving around too much. He found climbing the trees hard, and he couldn't run the way he used to. His muscles couldn't seem to hold on to him firm anymore. They shook and gave up when he tried anything too strenuous. His skin had faded from the sun-kissed brown he had as a young boy, staying and playing outside all day. Out of sight, out of mind. Now he was pale, pointed with permanent dark circles under his eyes. Much to Draco's distress, he had developed a stutter and a slight limp over the past year. He thought maybe because of all the times he had been crucioed. His mother had tried to convince his father to stop performing the cruciatus on Draco so often. People would notice, she had said. Did Lucius want people laughing at his son? They would if it didn't stop, she told him. What if Draco kept the stutter at school? Maybe even as an adult. What kind of general couldn't even utter a command without stumbling over each syllable? His father had ignored her, had said he would beat it out of him when the time came. Draco had sat at the dinner table between them both and listened to the conversation impassively. He had no reaction to it, internally or externally. It were as if they were talking about someone else, a boy he had never heard of. He had just continued delicately cutting up his meal and trying to get the pieces into his mouth without his hands shaking too much. Some of his father's friends had noticed his stutter when they'd been at the manor recently. They had been drinking in the smoking room, and he'd been skulking past on his way to the library. They called him in to fuck with him, Draco thought. Corbin Yaxley had called his name, motioned him into the room. He had sat in one of the leather wingback chairs with Barty Crouch. His father had slipped out, probably dealing with his mother in one of her drunken episodes, Draco imagined. They watched him walk towards them, desperately trying to hide his limp. And they took great pleasure in telling him that the great Harry Potter would be starting at Hogwarts at the same time as he would be, as if he didn't know, as if his father hadn't told him 100 times already. The boy who lived, who could compete with Harry Potter, Crouch had asked, his foul tongue darting out over his lips. Did Lucius really think that he, Draco, had any chance of standing out in his year with Potter there? Nothing he did would matter, Yaxley had tittered. Oh, Lucius was going to be furious. They had both laughed, and then Crouch had amused himself by throwing stinging hexes at Draco while he tried to dodge them. He had finally had enough and wandlessly smashed both of their glasses, sending glass shards flying in their faces, fire whiskey into their eyes. They had been livid. His father had walked back in to see Crouch kicking Draco in the head while Yaxley held him in a body bind. Lucius watched them both casually, walking patiently until their anger was done. Then he flicked his wand, releasing Draco from the binds. He scrambled to stand swaying, unsteady on his feet, dripping more of his blood onto the manor floors. His head was spinning from the force of the kicks. He could tell that his nose was broken, again. Draco wondered how many times a nose could break without collapsing. He realized with a horror that one of his front teeth was loose. Thank the gods he could heal himself now. Draco had been nauseated when he first learned that there were healing spells and potions. He had sat in the library, looked down at the simple spells in the book, and rocked with the realization that his mother could have easily erased his suffering as a small child. Used in a pitsky to mend small breaks, regrow his bones if she really wanted to. He thought back to his broken shoulder, his arm, the agony he had been in for the best part of a year. But no one had ever healed him. And now, at 11, he was hobbling like a broken old man. When Crouch had shown his father the smashed glass, he had demanded an explanation. Draco tried to come up with a reasonable answer, but he couldn't get it out. He was in pain, his jaw clenched, trying to hide it. He couldn't say the words he needed to say, couldn't get past the first syllable. Crouch had thought that was hilarious. He had slapped his knee and looked to Yaxley, an expression of glee, amusement on his face. What's the matter, boy? He asked, his eyes alight. Neasel got your tongue? Crouch and Yaxley had dissolved into fits of laughter until his father had shot violent curses at them both, shutting them up. But Lucius hadn't done it for Draco. He was simply embarrassed. He made Draco kneel in the glass and pick up every shard by hand, ignoring the blood that smeared the floor. He had then allowed Crouch to pour fire whiskey into the bleeding slices on Draco's palms and knees as penance for his crimes that day. But at least he had stopped crucioing him after that. And now Draco had only a few weeks before he could escape. He had finally done it. He had managed to stop himself from stuttering, training himself for hours in the library. He also healed some of the more obvious scars on his face, arms, and hands, places people would see. There was one exception, however, one scar he couldn't get rid of. His mother had only hit him once, and only once. She had been drunk. He'd been on his way to bed after reading in the library for the best part of 12 hours when they had passed each other in the hall. Narcissa had paused on her way to the wine cellar, had stopped and turned her fuzzy eyes to him, calling his name sloppily. When Draco looked at her, she held her arms out for a hug. He laughed. The sound had almost scared him as it bubbled out of him. He didn't know what it was. It had been so long since he felt a real laugh come from his stomach. But the ridiculousness of the fact that she thought he wanted a hug from her made him really, truly laugh. Her face had changed in an instant, and Narcissa backhanded him across the face. As she did, the large black diamond ring she wore in her index finger caught him in the cheek. At the time, it had been a deep slice. It kept bleeding off and on for days. So as he began healing himself, Draco kept that scar, a small white silver just over his cheekbone. He needed it as a reminder that really, she was just as bad as Lucius. She could have helped him so many times, Draco thought, and she didn't. He never wanted to forget that. He got up the next morning with his stomach churning, his father taking him shopping for robes and books, his first wand. He was dressed early but refused breakfast, much to the house elves' consternation. One elf in particular, Modals, had started trying to look after Draco, to protect him in her own way. She would cover for him if he accidentally broke something or made a mess. She'd warn him of his father's whereabouts in the house and try to feed him up, show him the care he wasn't getting from his parents. He appreciated it, but didn't need it. He was frustrated this morning as she kept trying to encourage him to eat. His stomach was in knots. He couldn't even force down some orange juice. Narcissa summoned him and set him down in front of her dresser mirror so that she could use her wand to fix his hair just the way she liked it, slick back, smooth. Draco's real hair was wild, stuck up everywhere, but that wouldn't do for a Malfoy. When she was done, his blonde hair gleamed, fixed in place like a seal, slick and shiny. She scrubbed his face with a Scourgify until his cheeks had some color, and shined his new designer shoes. His robes for the outing were new, opulent, screaming that they had money, that he was the perfect pure-blood prince. There was one last thing he needed before he left. Narcissa told him and went to get his father. A signet ring. The ring bore the letter M for Malfoy. His father removed it from his own pinky finger and handed it to him. "Wear this," he said, the familiar look of disdain on his face. "All the Malfoy men have worn this ring. It is a symbol of status. You, however disappointing you may be, carry my name and my blood, and therefore, when you leave this house and enter the world, you represent the Malfoy bloodline. Maybe wearing this ring will give you some sense of pride, some insight as to what's expected of you. Draco slid the ring onto his finger and curled his knuckles inwards. He was never going to take the ring off, he decided. He'd wear it like he wore his mother's scar, as a reminder of what he had endured and would continue to endure. He had a job to do now. He was going to make everyone proud. Hermione, May 2006. Hermione's stomach churned as she dressed for work. She couldn't bend down to put on her shoes without feeling like she might faint. She hadn't eaten, had vomit half the night, and not slept at all. She had been terrified to close her eyes again after the dream, feeling and smelling the hot, wet tickle of blood on her skin for hours afterwards. She felt like she could taste the coppery tang of it between her teeth, like the blood had gotten into her mouth. But that hadn't been the thing that had tortured her the most. Another feeling had stayed with Hermione, a feeling low in her belly, the feeling she had gotten when she had looked at the dream version of Draco Malfoy. A terrifying lust, clawing desperation for him. Snippets of his face played on repeat in her mind. His smile, his lashes splayed across his cheeks, the color of his eyes. She closed her own eyes with desire as the thought of him physically pained her. She swallowed down the feeling of utter wanton need that coursed through her veins. Hermione couldn't shake the feeling of it. She felt like she knew exactly what he would have felt like if the dream had progressed and she had undone his belt buckle. She could see it play out in her mind. It made her clench her legs together, her body responding even when her mind didn't want to. Hermione felt like she was losing herself somehow. Draco Malfoy had meant nothing to her for the last few years, other than being a thorn in the DMLE's side and a haunting presence in everyone's subconscious. Within 2 days, he had entered her life in her dreams. He was taking over almost every thought she had. Hermione thought that maybe she was in some sort of shock after seeing him hanging there. It had been such a traumatic death, and having known him as a child, maybe her brain was just struggling to come to terms with his life and death after Hogwarts. That was all it was, she told herself. He was evil. He was dead. She needed to remember it. She looked over at the copy of the Daily Prophet from the day before, lying folded on her bedside table, the headline screaming, "Draco Malfoy dead!" He was dead, and it was her job to find out how and why. She needed to pull herself together. She finally had the first of the memory viewings today, and then she wanted to go in on the autopsy. She didn't want Blaise to do it alone. Eventually, she managed to leave the house and head into the office. "Jesus, Hermione, you okay?" Blaise looked at her from his desk, a somewhat shocked expression on his face. "Sorry to say it, but you look like shite." She managed to roll her eyes at him. "Charming, Blaise. I really don't know what Jenny sees in you." He smiled, but came round his desk to her side. "Seriously, what's up?" "I'm okay. I'm just not sleeping, that's all." Blaise, knowing her better, wrapped her in a warm hug. He put his strong arms around her. The comforting smell of him and the softness of his blue knit sweater enveloped her. Hermione relaxed into the embrace of her best friend and tried not to cry. She took a few deep breaths, steadying breaths while still buried in his jumper, and then rearranged her face to her usual businesslike expression and moved out of his arms. Blaise had put a coffee on her desk, and she sat and sipped it for a moment, using it as a prop to hide the way her throat worked as she swallowed back tears. Why was she crying again? She looked down at her notepad. Okay, so we've got the viewings 9 a.m. to 12 p.m., 3 hours with the pensive now, and the autopsy is scheduled for 1 p.m. Blaise grimaced, and she grimaced back. They were never fun. They walked down to the pensive together. Harry was nowhere to be seen, busy in meetings, dealing with the fallout from the day before. But Blaise had the entry password and unlocked the door to the dark room where the memories were kept. One of the evidence technicians, probably Katie, had lined up the vials of Malfoy's memories in date order along the top of the current evidence cabinet. Each vial was neatly labeled in Malfoy's elegant script, much as the books had been. She thought back to the books, the life of Draco Malfoy he had written on the front of each one, although those had been numbered rather than dated as the vials were. She wondered what kind of game he was playing with them, leaving the books there but unable to be read. Maybe the memories would be the same? Hermione thought, another red herring. She thought she'd scream if so. She needed some answers, even just a start point. Blaise selected the vial that showed the earliest date, March 1986. Malfoy would have been about 6, she thought. She was sure he was born the same year as Harry in 1980. He brought it to the pensive and uncorked it, pouring the shimmering liquid in. Hermione watched as the memory formed on the surface of the basin. This was it, Hermione thought. Finally. She and Blaise both leaned in. The manor was bleak, as she remembered. Wooden floors, dark walls, heavy drapes, and heavy overstuffed furniture. Mahogany wood and deep emerald green everywhere. The portraits on the walls stared down malevolently. The chandeliers glinted in the candlelight, and the manor seemed still, empty. She suddenly heard the sound of running feet. A small boy came skidding around the corner. He was skinny and wiry, small for his age, with skin knees poking out of a pair of tweed shorts. Long gray socks with black lace-up shoes on his feet. He wore a gray shirt open to the neck and a waistcoat. It all looked quite uncomfortable, but the little boy didn't seem to notice. His blonde hair was wild, sticking up at all angles. His face was mischievous, alight with excitement as he ran down the halls. His eyes were large in his face, and almost transparent gray. He was adorable, Hermione thought. Draco Malfoy at 6 did not look like the pale, hard-faced boy he had been when he began at Hogwarts. He burst into a room now where his parents were sat taking tea at a table. Lucius Malfoy, the same as ever, long blonde hair, ice-cold eyes, flowing robe, and his cane in his hand. Narcissa was wearing a high-collared black lace dress, her hair piled on top of her head. She startled as Draco burst into the room, banging the door on its hinges. "Mother, father, come see," the little boy cried, motioning towards them. "I've caught a sprite. I got it in the garden underneath the plant pot right now." He was excited, bouncing up and down on the soles of his feet. Lucius looked at him and looked behind him in the hallway. There was mud tracked into the room on the bottom of Draco's shoes and on his socks. A few seconds later, there was a sudden loud crack. Hermione didn't realize what it was at first, till she saw the small boy fly through the air. His father had hexed him, sending the small boy flying back. Draco had landed against the side table, the back of his head cracking hard against the wood. He lay almost dazed, eyes muddled, as he brought a hand up to the back of his head and brought it away red. "Lucius," Narcissa began. "He didn't know." But Lucius paid her no mind. He advanced on his son, staring down at him, the expression on his face enraged, vicious. "How many times have you been told you do not run through this manor with mud on your shoes?" he asked, voice like ice. Draco looked up, stuttering. "I'm sorry, Dada. I wanted to show you my—" His words were cut off as the air left him. Lucius had swung a foot into his stomach. "Lucius, no!" Narcissa shouted. His wand flicked back, and she was instantly silenced, her mouth moving wordlessly. Lucius Malfoy continued to kick his 6-year-old son in his stomach, his legs, his chest, everywhere, anywhere he could reach as the boy curled into a ball and tried to protect himself. Draco cried. He cried and cried, but it only seemed to enrage Lucius further. When he eventually reached the limit of his rage, he stopped kicking. His hair had come down over his face. He was sweating. He leaped down and plucked Draco up by his collar, pulling him into a seated position. Hermione looked in horror. Blaise had taken her hand as they watched the terrible scene play out. Draco was dazed, his face a mess of blood, snot, and tears. He looked up at his father, one eye already closing in purple. "You will clean this mess," Lucius hissed. Draco's one good eye was huge, glassy with tears. He looked up into his father's face, his terror and pain clear to see. Lucius bent down further, a cruel smile lightening over his features. "You will lick every bit of mud from the floor in this manor. Every bit. If I find even one smear of mud, you will truly feel my wrath. You will know what pain is then, my boy." Draco nodded, blood dripping from his nose as he did. His father watched as he knelt onto the floor, his face in the mud. Hermione watched the tears drip from the small boy's eyes as he obeyed his father, and then she could watch no more. She pulled her face out of the pensive, a sob racking her body. Blaise stood up next to her, his face mirroring her own emotions. They stood together, the shock of what they had both seen rendering them speechless. Hermione felt it coming again. She managed to stumble from the pensive to the corner, bending over and pulling her hair back before releasing another hot stream of vomit onto her shoes.